We'll be there in a little bit. James chapter 4, verse number 8. Sometimes you may wonder, say, well, Pastor, how do you come up with some of the messages you have? A lot of times God will just give me a thought, and sometimes it'll be as simple as, well, what do I need? If I think on the things that I need, I'm sure that you need it as well. So sometimes the Lord will speak to me in that way as well. And this is a message that I brought up because I need it. And I think it is undoubtedly something that we all need. I don't think there's any doubt about that. You'll know that when I get to the subject matter. There isn't a person on the earth who can claim that they have reached the zenith or the peak or the pinnacle of our subject matter today. Our text is a well-known verse, James chapter 4 and verse number 8. We sung a song earlier about nearer to God, and our subject matter is on that today. Verse number 8 of James chapter 4 says, "Draw nigh to God, and he will draw nigh to you. Cleanse your hands, ye sinners, and purify your hearts, ye double-minded." Our subject today, and again, as I mentioned it, I think hopefully it would ring true in all of our minds. You would say, yep, I need that message too. I need to get closer to God. There isn't a person, as I mentioned, on earth who says, you know what, I can't get any closer to God. That's not going to ever happen, by the way. Not on this side of heaven. So on this side of heaven, we all need to get closer to God. And it's my opinion that with all that we have that occupies us today, and we're living in this technological age, there's just so much that can gather your time and your attention and your affections that I think that God's getting left out. Even in the life of Christians. We get so busy and drawn into things and tied into things that getting close to God is something that I think we can all say, you know what, I need more of that. I need to find a way to get closer to God. And today I just want to share some thoughts that the Lord gave me in preparing this message that I thought to myself, what would draw me closer to the Lord? What are some things I need to think about in drawing closer to the Lord? And I hope it helps you this morning as well. A message simply entitled, Draw Near to God. Draw near to God. We all need it. I need it. You need it. And hopefully when we walk out of here today, we'll know better how to get closer to God. So before we get started, we will open up in a word of prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for the subject matter today. Lord, I don't think there's anything we can do more in life than try to draw close to you. Lord, not only because you are worthy of it, but Lord, from all that we get from drawing close to you. Lord, I tend to wonder what our lives would be if our focus, above all else, in our lives would be to draw as close to you as we possibly could. Now, Lord, I don't know of too many people today that are experiencing that. But I pray, Lord, as we learn of these helpful things to do, Lord, I pray that today that we would focus, leaving here today with a goal and a purpose in our daily life to draw closer to you, to draw near to you. And Lord, we know that we'll be blessed and benefited by it, and we'll thank you for it in Jesus' name. Amen. As I was thinking about drawing near to God, I thought to myself, well, to me, what do I need? What do I think would impress me enough and give me the drive and determination to draw closer to God? And these are some of the things I thought about. And I want you to see number one in helping us draw near to God is this: focus on God's worth. Focus on God's worth. Turn to Revelation chapter 5 and verse number 12. If you want to draw closer to God in your life, I think we have to focus on God's worth. Revelation chapter 5 and verse number 12. We see worship going on in heaven here in this verse. It says in verse number 12, let's look at verse 11. "And I beheld, and I heard the voice of many angels round about the throne, and the beast and the elders, and the number of them was 10,000 times 10,000 and thousands of thousands." That's an innumerable group of people there. No number there. And what are they doing? Verse 12. Are they just hanging around enjoying heaven? Are they walking down the gold streets? Are they eating of the wonderful fruit-bearing trees that will keep us healthy for all eternity? That's all part of being in heaven. But that's not what's going to be primarily happening in heaven. What primarily happens in heaven is found in verse 12. It's worship. Saying with a loud voice, and I'll tell you what, I can't wait to be part of this throng, because this is you and I here, by the way. Do you realize that? John is seeing us doing this in the future. One day, you and I will fulfill verse number 12. Saying with a loud voice, worthy is the Lamb that was slain to receive power and riches and wisdom and strength and honor and glory and blessing, and the list could go on and on and on of all God is worthy of. And this is what you and I are going to get a chance to do one day in heaven. The worth of God. Now, when you think about drawing close to something, we usually have worth in mind when we draw close to something, don't we? I mean, if something's not worth it, you don't want to get close to it. When was the last time you saw any worth in hugging a skunk? Any worth in that? Oh, look at that little skunk. Come here, buddy. Right? Anybody doing that? For the most part. Most people don't do it. But most people just don't run up and hug a little cute skunk, right? They might be cute, but they stink a little bit. Yeah, and they're not going to greet you with a hug. And why? Because we don't see a lot of worth in all of that, right? Sometimes we draw close to people who would wind up having a good effect on us, don't we? Sometimes we might make an example, say, hey, you see that person there? You need to try to get closer to that person. You get closer to that person, they're going to help you out in life, right? There's worth involved there. People may want to draw closer to a healthier weight in life because it would be worth it in so many ways. Some people may say, well, if I could just lose 30 pounds, I know I would feel better, and I know my health would be better. I could get rid of this health problem. What are we doing? We're seeing the worth in drawing closer to a weight that's beneficial for us. You get closer to warmth when you're cold, don't you? Sometimes when it gets chilly in here. Sometimes the wives will snuggle up to the husband, right? Are they doing that just because they're overwhelmed with love at that moment? Probably not. They want to get warm. So what are they doing? They get closer to their husband, right? There's value in that. There's worth in that. I'm going to get warm when I move closer to this source. On the other hand, when something is hot, you want to get closer to something that's cooler. How many of you on a summer day, especially as a kid, you were hot and thirsty, you ran in and you shoved your face into the freezer? Right? Why? Because you get closer to that cold air and all of a sudden the heat that's on your face is feeling better. There's worth in sticking your head in the freezer in the summer. Because it feels good, right? We do that. We weigh out worth before we decide on getting close to something. That's why when you see that skunk, there's no worth in that. So you're not going to attempt that. The first step in drawing closer to the Lord is the worth that God can bring us. Think about that. When you weigh out anything else in life and determine its worth and closeness, I believe that's how we have to consider God. So you know what? For me to get closer to the Lord, there's a whole lot of worth in that. There's a whole lot of benefits and blessings attached to me getting closer to God. That's what we need to consider. So you know what? What is the worth? Well, for God's worth, it's limitless. There is no limit to what we can find in getting closer to the Lord. And understand this, if we never seek to get closer to God, it may just be that we don't see the worth in it. Does that make sense? Because there are things that we weigh out in life that we say it's worth getting close to. Well, if we don't ever desire the need to get close to God, maybe we don't see the worth in it. Think about that. If your life has never moved forward in getting closer to God, it might just be that in your heart and mind, you don't see any real worth in it. And if that's the situation, you've got some serious spiritual problems. You don't see God the way that you should, and you don't experience and enjoy God the way that you should. And as a result, you don't get the benefits and blessings of getting close to God. So the first thing I see is focus on God's worth. When you go out of here today, hopefully you've got a new purpose in finding a means of getting closer to God. Walk out of here and say, boy, let me just consider all the benefits and blessings that will come to me as I try to get closer to God. That's what you're doing. You're establishing God's worth. And if you don't ever attempt to draw close to God, it's quite likely you don't see any worth in that, and you need some spiritual help if that's the occasion. First of all, focus on God's Word. Second of all, you have to want it. You have to want to be closer to God. Psalm chapter 42 and verse number 1. You have to want it. Psalm chapter 42 and verse number 1. Well-known verse. There's a hymn that has been made from this song, this verse here. Psalm 42 and verse number 1. As the hart or the deer panteth after the water brooks, so panteth my soul after thee, O God. The psalmist here is comparing the extreme thirst of a deer and its desire to quench that thirst with you and I and our desire to find God and quench the thirst that God should have in our life. The thirsty deer seeks to not only get close to the brook, but also to partake of the brook, right? Not just willing to get there, it wants to salve its parched tongue and throat. And it's quite likely that most Christians, perhaps, are having their thirst quenched some other way than besides God. Maybe that's why we cannot identify with the deer here. The deer that has to find the brook. The deer that will do whatever it can to quench its thirst. Because in this verse, our pursuit of God is likened to what that deer is doing. And you and I ought to again be the same way in life. But in order to have that kind of desire, you have to want it. Hey, guess what? That deer wants the water brooks. That deer wants the water brooks more than it even wants some food to eat because it needs to quench its thirst. The deer wants it. And a lot of Christians, I think, today are having their thirst quenched, but not by God. If we say that we want to get closer to God, we really want it. We really need to want it. The question is, do you really want it? Because getting closer to God is going to determine some changes in our life. And that's sometimes the sticking point for a lot of Christians. Is that, you know what, I'd like to get closer to God, but boy, it's going to demand some changes in this part of my life that I'm just not willing to give up. If you want to get closer to God, you have to really want it. Just like this deer really wants the cool water brooks. And by the way, if we never seek to draw near to God, just like in our first point, if you don't ever draw near to God, it's quite likely you don't see the worth in it. And if you never seek to draw near to God, it's quite likely that you really don't want to. Because guess what? There's things in life that you want, you can point to them. And there's things in life that you want, and there's things in life that you want to do, and if you want them bad enough, you wind up doing it, don't you? The bottom line. Hey, I really want that, I'm going to go get it. I really want to go here, I'm going to go there. Things that we really want, we pursue, and we do. And if we don't ever desire to get closer to God, it's quite likely that we really don't want to begin with. Now, we hate to be that honest with ourselves, but again, actions speak louder than words. If you don't ever want to get close to your spouse, or you don't ever pursue closest to your spouse, it's quite likely you don't want to, right? Whenever I get a chance to sit, and especially during Sunday school, I sit with my wife in Sunday school, the first thing I want to do is sit close to her. I want that. And I do that. I sit close to her. Put my arm around her, I'll hug her, I'll hold her hand. I want to get close to her. I want that. Because I want that, that's what I do. And if we don't ever attempt to get close to God, it's quite likely that we really don't want to begin with. You need to weigh these things out in your life and ask yourself, in my entire life, I've never really pursued getting as close to God as possible. Why haven't I? Do I really not see the worth in it? Do I really not want it? Do I believe that there's too many things I got to change in order to get there? Is this really the problem? Is this really the sticking point? Is this really the thing that solves this issue for me all of my life? Never really attempting to get close to God. Is this really the problem? If it is, let's change it. Let's establish the worth of God, and let's tell ourselves, you know what? I really, really want it. Thirdly, prioritize God. Prioritize God. Matthew chapter 6 and verse number 33. And again, folks, you'll be saying, you know, it's pretty obvious verses. Yes, they are. And it's wonderful that they're in the Bible for us because they point out some great truths. Sometimes it's the obvious things that we miss the most. But not only should we focus on God's worth We also have to want a closeness with God. Thirdly, we have to prioritize God. Matthew chapter 6 and verse number 33, but seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. See, when that word first is thrown in there, you know what that tells me? Priority. Priority. God is saying the first thing you need to do, the very first thing on your list of priorities, the thing that's at the top of your list of priorities, is me. Seek ye first the kingdom of God. Now, if God isn't a priority, he'll become what I call a puzzle piece in your life. Okay? If he's not at the very top of your list, if God is not the sum of your life, if God is not your priority, he'll become a puzzle piece, and quite likely he will be a puzzle piece that finds its way languishing behind other puzzle pieces in your life that have the priority over God. That's the bottom line. Maybe God isn't a priority in your life. Maybe you don't draw closer to God because he's really not a priority. Maybe there are things in your life that are generally more important. And if that's the case, fix it. Put God at the top of your priority list. Again, understand, when we're talking about our facts this morning, God's worth is greater than any worth, isn't it? Would you take $1 billion to walk away from God? I would hope you wouldn't. Oh, you'd have a good life as far as money is concerned, but you wouldn't have what really counts in life. The bottom line is that we have to see God's worth for what it is. We have to realize that closeness with God is the thing that we should want the most. And since those things are true, we need to put closeness with God at the very top of our list of priorities. Ask yourself, is that the case? Do I prioritize God every day, or do I just squeeze him in? Do I prioritize God every day, or is he just on the list somewhere down the line? Because I'll tell you what, if Satan can get you to a point where God is on the list but not at the top of it, he'll make sure all those things in front of God get done first. And he'll make sure you don't spend any time with God. Priorities. Again, if you've never gotten to a point in your life where you've attempted to get closer to God, maybe it's because it has never become a priority in your life. Maybe you've never thought, you know what, this is important. This is what I need. Ask yourself, some of the things that's going on in your life today, and they're taking the place of your worship and adoration and closeness with God, identify those things. Say, what is it that's doing this? Because I want to lead this into my fourth point. Not only do we prioritize God, but fourthly, we need to get rid of the distractions. First of all, focus on God's worth. Second of all, you have to want it. Thirdly, prioritize God. And fourthly, get rid of the distractions. 1 Corinthians chapter 7 and verse number 35. In this chapter, Paul is talking about marriage and those who are virgins, otherwise not married, and talking about the benefits of both. And there's a phrase in this 35th verse of 1 Corinthians chapter 7 I want to focus on that has always spoke to me. Paul says in verse number 35, "And this I speak for your own profit, not that I may cast a snare upon you, but for that which is comely or beneficial, and that ye may attend upon the Lord without distraction." Paul says, I'm giving you this information, not to be a hindrance or a snare unto you, but to help you, that you find a way in your life to attend upon the Lord, and you do so without distraction. The only thing that would keep us from getting closer to God as something that we pursue is because of distractions. Something is distracting you. Something else has your attention. Something else is controlling what you do. It's called a distraction. And folks, if we could focus on getting closer to God every day, we wouldn't have to deal with distractions, would we? Because it would be at the top of our list. It would be a priority. There wouldn't be anything in front of us to distract us from getting closer to God. And again, ask yourself, what are some of the distractions in your life that's keeping you from the greatest relationship that you can have in this life, and that's with God. Understand that. The greatest relationship we can have with anyone is with God. Not with your mate, not with your kids, not with your parents, and not with your friends. The greatest relationship that anybody can have with anyone on this earth is with God. No doubt about it. What are some of the distractions that Satan throws in your way? Some distractions could be sinful. There are sinful distractions. But guess what? We've talked about this before. Most of your distractions likely won't be sinful. And that's what makes them so deceptive. Because we don't realize them as sinful, but they begin to take up the bulk of our time, the bulk of our energy, the bulk of our devotion. And before you know it, we have so many things that have distracted us that at the end of the day, you know what happened? You say, oh, you know what? I forgot to read my Bible today. Oh, you know what? I wanted to pray today and I didn't pray. Why did that happen? Because we got distracted with other things. God wasn't our priority. Other things became the priority because guess what? They got done, didn't they? Right? There are things in life that may push the things of God on the back burner. And the bottom line is you got those things done, didn't you? You made sure you got those things done. You put time and energy and devotion into those things, and it kept taking your time away from God and putting it on the back burner and putting it back and back and back until you're at the very end of the day and now you're out of time. And it's not necessarily because you've been living in sin. You may just have your list of priorities out of whack, and you may just be distracted in the wrong things. Whatever it is, whether it's sinful or whether it's not sinful. If something is continually in your way from getting you closer to God, identify it and then eliminate it. Because that then becomes your God, doesn't it? You say, well, I would never worship an idol. You may not. But you may worship a TV show that always bogs down your time where God doesn't have your time. You may say, I would never worship an idol, but you may be sitting at the feet of the internet. And you're on the computer all day long. And by the time it's time for God, you're worn out and you have no time left. That becomes your God. That's what you put your devotion and energy and time into. You've been distracted. Ask yourself, what is it that's keeping me from this pursuit of being close to God? Be honest with yourself. Say, you know what? That thing right there, that's it. I love that. I cherish it. I put all my energy into it. It's not sinful. I get a lot of enjoyment out of it. But it does rob me. It takes away my time from what I could be doing for the Lord. If that's the case, identify it and then eliminate it. Or put it on the back burner. Rather than trying to squeeze God in at the end of the day, why don't you give God his time that he's due early, if you've got the time, and then those things that take up most of your day, why don't you put them on the back burner? Say, instead of doing them at the beginning of the day, I'll do that at the end of the day. And then I'll have the early part of the day to give to God and getting close to him. Prioritize. Distractions. Identify them and eliminate them. A couple of more. In order to get close to God, you have to plan time with God. You have to plan time with God. Turn to Genesis chapter 24. Genesis chapter 24. This is the account of Isaac. Abraham has sought a wife for him. Eleazar, the steward of the house of Abraham, has been out seeking a wife who eventually would become Rebekah. And these verses may not stand out in any way. I think they sort of give us an idea of what my point's talking about here. Genesis chapter 24, verses 62 and 63. Genesis chapter 24. It says, and Isaac in verse 62 came from the way of the well Lahairoi, for he dwelt in the south country. And Isaac went out to meditate in the field at the eventide, and he lifted up his eyes and saw, and behold, the camels were coming. Notice here that Isaac went out, quote, to meditate in the field at eventide, at nighttime. In verse 62, he had been in the fields. He had been by the well of Lahairoi. He had dwelt in the south country, but he made a decision. He made a plan. And in verse number 63, he came out into the field. It was in the evening, and he took time to meditate. What was Isaac meditating on? He wasn't doing yoga. No, he wasn't doing that. What was he meditating on? He was meditating with God. I think we can draw that from the verse. He was meditating with God. It's clear that Isaac set time aside for God. He had been in the field all day, but as nighttime approached, he says, you know what, I got to make time for God. I've got to get alone in the fields and think on my God. I've got to get closer to him. He set the time aside, and he kept that time solely and completely for him and God. How's the best way to understand that? Human relationships. When you have two spouses that are in love with each other and they plan a date, when they plan that date, several things should occur when that plan is made. First of all, it should be something they look forward to, right? Because, hey, when you're in love with your spouse and you get that private and alone time with him, you look forward to that. Hey, honey, tonight's date night, right? Just wanted to make sure. Tonight's date night, right? 5 o'clock. Yep. Put it off on the calendar. Can't wait, right? Should be something we look forward to. We should anticipate it. Man, it's 4:30. Date night with the wife, about a half hour. Man, I can't wait. Man, that clock can't move fast enough, right? Because you're anticipating it. You want to be there with her or with him. Not only do you look forward to it, you anticipate it. You keep it except in the case of an emergency. Nothing's standing in our way tonight. Got the kids organized to be watched. I've got this taken care of, that taken care of. Just me and the wife, or vice versa tonight. Nothing's going to stand in the way in case of an emergency. Something else, you plan to get as much out of each other as you possibly can. Because that's what that time is for. You're there to enjoy each other, to get closer to each other. That's why you make that date. You plan it ahead of time. Well, shouldn't we be the same thing with God? Again, is there a human relationship greater than the one that we can have with God? No, there isn't. Although in reality, I think for most of us, we probably don't have as close a relationship with God as we have with other people in our lives. And we should try to change that. We should be the same with God. Plan your time with God. Look at it in the same way that you would look at a planned date as far as a human relationship is concerned. Say, you know, Lord, tonight, 7 o'clock, that's my time for you, Lord. I'm going to get along with you. I look forward to it. I anticipate it. I'm going to keep it unless there's some sort of an emergency that's going to stop it. And Lord, in that time, I'm going to plan to get as much out of you as humanly possible. Folks, could you imagine where you would be as a Christian? Where I would be as a Christian if that was the main impulse of our life? If all we ever sought to do above everything else is seeking to get as close to God as humanly possible. Plan time with God. Plan it. Keep it. Enjoy it as much as you can. Get out all that you can. Keep it at all costs. And one more thing I want you to see tonight or this morning is this. Number 6, getting closer to God will change you. Again, we talked about early on the worth. What is the worth of getting closer to God? You're going to change. Turn to Exodus chapter 34. Verses 27 to 35 is our closing text. Exodus chapter 34. Verses 27 to 35. In our closing text, we're going to see, this is about Moses here. Moses has been on the mount. And there's no doubt that Moses had been with God, right? There's no doubt. In a way that most of us on this side of heaven certainly will never know. Moses knew it. Moses was in the mount. He spent time with God. And we're going to see when Moses came down off of that mount, there were visible, physical changes to his appearance. Now, by the way, I don't think Moses knew about the changes. He didn't have a mirror in front of him, right? But others saw it. The moment they encountered Moses, from the closeness he had with God, they saw something different in him. in a spiritual sense, the natural, guaranteed effect of getting closer to God will be seen with others. Guaranteed, you will be changed in the right way. And folks, if you have never changed in your Christian life, perhaps you have gotten worse in your Christian life. If there's never been any identifiable change in your life that shows the benefits and blessings that you have had in getting closer to God, it could be that you have never gotten close to God to begin with. Because when you get close to God, you will be changed. You will be a different person. People around you will notice it. Because the natural effect. Let's look what happened to Moses here. Verses 27 to 35 of Genesis 34. The Lord said unto Moses, Write thou these words, for after the tenor of those words I have made a covenant with thee and with Israel. And he was there with the Lord 40 days and 40 nights. He did neither eat bread nor drink water. Now, you can survive without food for 40 days, but you can't survive without water for 40 days. So this is likened almost to a resurrection. God supernaturally kept Moses alive during these 40 days. And all Moses' focus for 40 days was between him and the Lord. And he wrote upon the tables the words and the covenant, the 10 commandments. And it came to pass when Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the 2 tables of testimony in Moses' hand, when he came down from the mount, that Moses wist or knew not that the skin of his face shone or shined while he talked with them. Imagine that. You know, some of our faces shine because of sweat, perhaps. That's as close as we're ever going to get. But there was something about Moses' face that was supernatural. Okay? Because they're going to have to do something because of the influence of God's closeness to Moses here. His face shined. Moses didn't know it. Verse 30. And when Aaron and all the children of Israel saw Moses, behold, the skin of his face shone, and they were afraid to come nigh or near to him. It wasn't just some minor difference. His face shined in a way that they had never seen before. And they said, boy, I don't even want to get close to him. Because we know that if we get too close to God, we'll die. Maybe if we get too close to Moses now, we'll die. Because he was in the very presence of God. We can see that on his face. 31. And Moses called unto them, and Aaron and all the rulers of the congregation returned unto him, and Moses talked with them. And afterward all the children of Israel came nigh, and he gave them the commandment, all that the Lord had spoken with him in Mount Sinai. Until Moses had done speaking with them, he put a veil on his face. This influence of God just continued. It didn't wear off, did it? He said, while I'm talking with you, in order to avoid all the issues, your concerns, give me a veil. I'll cover the shine. In 34, when Moses went in before the Lord to speak with him, he took the veil off until he came out. And he came